choice about making change, it's the scale of change and the vision of change that is now the biggest challenge in front of us. Just let's be clear about the climate emergency that is currently surrounding us. In the time that it's taken us to move from the forest to the square, 6,000 people have been made homeless as a result of the climate crises. This isn't war, this isn't ethnic cleansing, it isn't prejudice. It's because of our common neglect of the consequences of our actions over decades. An economics that tries to live well beyond its means. Every city knows that we need to build zero carbon housing and zero energy buildings or energy plus buildings. But instead, we're faced with local authorities like our own that has to give planning approval to crap buildings from developers who ought to be in prison, not in profit. And they ought to be able to say, we will not give permission to anything that turns out to be the legacy of stuff that has to be cleaned up within a decade of being constructed. We know how to do it. We just have to have the power and the resources and the mandate to do so. All of the answers are out there. All of them are being delivered by people like you and me in the fragments of the lives that they have control over. And we have to say to our leaders, this is the time for big dreams, and survival itself is what is affordable, desirable, and non-negotiable. So the lifestyle changes. I used to stand up here and make the case for revolution. Actually, the climate and the planet is declared its own revolution. What we need now are not so much revolutionaries, but visionaries. The love that people feel for their partners, for their families, for their children, for their grandchildren, cannot be put off for days to come. And the leaders inside COP need to know that if they won't make the change, we will. We will make the change, we will be the change, and you are the change, and bless every one of you.
We know that the rich industrialised countries like our own have caused the climate crisis. For more than 200 years we've exploited the planet and its people. We can't export responsibility for tackling the problems of today to the world's poorest countries. It would be immoral to ask them to pay the price of cleaning up our mess, not least because they're already bearing the brunt of climate emergency. Floods, droughts and disease, extreme heat and wildfires, toxic air and polluted water. None of us are untouched, but for people from Barbados to the Maldives, from Tuvalu to Kenya, this is beyond urgent. Indigenous communities in the most vulnerable areas can't wait any longer. Now at Paris, we set out an ambition to limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. Glasgow must set out a clear plan to keep that alive. We can't afford failure. We can't afford delay. Last week, the UN reported that we're on track for a disastrous 2.7 degrees of warming. To meet 1.5 degrees, we need to start yesterday and cut carbon emissions in half this decade. We've got to invest in adaptation and mitigation to protect people from the damage that's already done. But it doesn't have to be a picture of doom. There's a huge opportunity to create a better future for all of us. Good jobs and decent wages, cleaner air and warmer homes, lifting people out of poverty here and around the world. We can be so much better than those Tory ministers who claim to be representing us at COP26. Yet in the weeks before the summit began, what did they do? They created a trade deal that cut out the climate pledges. They cut taxes on domestic air travel, and they abandoned millions of people around the world by cutting the aid budget. Well, they don't speak for me, and do they speak for you?
Now is the time to call out love and call out strength. Now is the time, as never before, to pull out all the stops. We have a tiny window, the scientists tell us, maybe 3 or 4 years to turn the tanker around, that whole damn fossil fuel tanker. And between government rhetoric and action, the gap continues immense. The words may be on the table, but true political will and the money is not. Now is the reckoning, and still it is those people of the global south who with their lives and their land are paying first and hardest. George Monbiot, journalist and activist, was recently asked, "So George, in the face of the climate emergency, what 3 things can we as individuals do?" And he said it without a pause. Mobilize, mobilize, mobilize. That's it. The time for small individual actions is gone. It is only through pressure from the people, not everyone, but enough people coming together in mass non-violent action, relentlessly, bravely, that governments will be forced to step up to what needs to be done. And more than anything, we need each other. We need each other's support and love and determination and intelligence to join together in whatever organizations or groups speak to us, to come together and hold together and act. In this struggle for survival of all we hold precious, we must learn to put aside differences, embrace diversities, listen, reach out, holding to our hearts, acting despite our fear, in our love and defense of life itself.
This was predictable, this was preventable, and it has always been caused by the top 10% who don't really mind if they exploit the planet and people, just so long as they turn over a profit. Despite the predictability of climate chaos, there's a deep irony as global leaders have increasingly buried their heads in the sand for the past 30 years, allowing their mates to become billionaires off the back of it. They want us to bury our heads too. They want us to ignore their oppressive mentalities and formidable avarice. Not only that, they want us to praise them for what has so far been a half-ass, false promise, greenwashed COP26 photo op fest. They want us to point the finger at ourselves. They want us to point the finger at each other. A classic new right narrative of blaming the worst affected. Oh, how transparent your rhetoric is. We know that 100 corporations cause 70% of emissions. In fact, your rhetoric has never been more transparent. So instead, I'm pointing my finger at you, Boris Johnson. Know that the youth of the world are watching and listening so intently to you and your chums that we will not let another 5, 10, 15, 20 years go by without climate justice. And we will get louder and louder, and our message will become stronger and stronger like the tide. And trust me, Mr. Johnson, we will get it, because the world depends on it.